Hi, today we will be diving into evaluation questions. While your section of this class may not have you developing or writing a logic model, you will hear it referenced in some of the module work today. Logic models are simply the organizational structure which outlines each of the components that we will be working on during this class. Developing evaluation questions is described in multiple ways throughout the multiple sources that you have read and will review in this module. Our textbook describes the process as being twofold. Including divergent and convergent. The divergent phase is what I like to call the spaghetti phase. This is the phase when you are throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what may stick. During this phase, you want to list out all of the possible directions. It is important during this phase that you consider multiple sources. Our text authors provide a good overview of those sources and include stakeholders, evaluation approaches, established criteria, the evaluator's professional judgment, subject matter experts, and research and evaluation. You have already learned about a large variety of evaluation approaches. In Table 13.1 on page 301 illustrates how the questions would differ based on the evaluation approaches. The video you will watch from IES in a few moments will break down considering evaluation questions by what you are evaluating. They will walk you through considering process.
Welcome to the first chapter of the second module of the Program Evaluation Toolkit. Although you can start with any module in the toolkit, it is best to at least review Module 1, which covers logic models, before beginning Module 2. The logic model is the foundation of program evaluation in this toolkit. You will refer to your logic model throughout the toolkit as you develop evaluation questions, choose an evaluation design, select a sample, identify data sources needed to address the questions, develop data collection instruments, finalize an analysis plan, and disseminate findings. This module includes 3 chapters, each highlighting a phase in the development of evaluation questions. Chapter 1 answers the question, how do evaluation questions relate to the logic model, and describes 2 types of evaluation questions, process and outcome. Chapter 2 describes how to write evaluation questions using the PARSEC framework, which stands for pertinent, answerable, reasonable, specific, evaluative, and complete. Chapter 3 describes the process for prioritizing evaluation questions so that you have an actionable evaluation plan. Refer to the resources page of the website for worksheets, templates, and other resources to help you develop your own evaluation questions. Let's get started with the first chapter, which describes how evaluation questions relate to the logic model. A sound logic model is the foundation for effective program evaluation. A logic model can inform evaluation questions that focus on program improvement and the impact of a program. If you do not have at least a workable logic model yet, return to Module 1 to develop one. This toolkit focuses on 2 general types of evaluation questions, process and outcome. Process evaluation questions are concerned with the quality of program implementation and improvement. For example, process evaluation questions might ask, to what extent is the program making use of available resources? To what extent are program activities being implemented as shown in the outputs? To what extent is the program being implemented as intended? Or, what were the challenges and facilitators in terms of getting the program up and running? Process evaluation questions are sometimes called formative questions, which means that they may be answered while a program is underway in order to modify implementation. Process evaluation questions may also be answered after a program is completed in order to understand how well the program worked and what changes may be necessary before repeating or scaling up the program. Answering process evaluation questions after a program is completed may also provide context for interpreting the results of the program. This purpose is discussed further in Module 8. Outcome evaluation questions are concerned with the impact of a program over time. They can focus on short and midterm outcomes, as well as long-term outcomes. These types of questions are sometimes called summative questions. They are typically not answered until key program activities have been implemented. For example, these types of questions might ask, to what extent did the program improve students' math scores? To what extent did tutors use the program materials in their work with students? Or, to what extent were tutors knowledgeable of the program's content? Here, you can see the framework of a logic model and understand how it supports the creation of both types of evaluation questions. Process evaluation questions focus on resources, activities, and outputs, helping to ensure that your program is on track to meet its outcomes. Outcome evaluation questions include everything that you hope your program will accomplish, ranging from short-term outcomes, for example, changes in knowledge or understanding, to long-term outcomes, for example, systemic changes such as increased graduation rates. Module 1 introduced a fictitious program called AMP, which stands for After School Middle Grades Math Program. In this example, a middle school has been experiencing low rates of math homework completion among its students. School leaders believe the low homework completion rates are contributing to low math achievement scores. Another issue at the school is high numbers of unsupervised students after school. The school leaders believe that the unsupervised students are contributing to community issues, such as vandalism. To address these concerns, the middle school has started the after-school program, AMP. AMP offers math tutoring, math extension, homework completion support, recreational activities, and field trips during after-school hours. Here is the example logic model for AMP from Module 1. This logic model, including research citations, is available on the resources page of the website so that you can download it for further examination. You will work with the logic model as you formulate evaluation questions. AMP likely differs from your own program, but using the AMP logic model to draft process and outcome evaluation questions can be helpful. To write process evaluation questions, consider what an evaluation team might want to know about the AMP implementation to inform potential changes. One question could focus on the cost of activities. For example, which activities require the most resources? Another question could involve looking at the extent to which each activity is being used. Together, such process evaluation questions can help inform decisions about which activities should be kept, changed, or discontinued. Now, think about the outcome evaluation questions. One of the short-term outcomes for AMP is increased tutor knowledge of effective techniques, so a question focusing on the tutor's effectiveness after training would be appropriate. Of course, an evaluation team also wants to see an impact on students, so a question related to homework completion would also be useful in describing successes. Convening a group of stakeholders to discuss the most desirable outcomes of a program may be a useful exercise. Now that you have considered the AMP example, you can return to your own logic model, which you drafted in Module 1, and create at least one process evaluation question and one outcome evaluation question. You will explore these questions further in the following chapters in Module 2. Use the Identifying Evaluation Questions worksheet, available on the resources page of the website, to draft these questions. In that worksheet, you will write your questions, identify the logic model components from which the questions originated, and categorize the questions as process or outcome questions. Next, in Chapter 2, you will revise the evaluation questions using the PARSEC framework, which stands for pertinent, answerable, reasonable, specific, evaluative, and complete.
In Chapter 2 of the Evaluation Question module by IES, you will learn a method called PARSEC for writing your evaluation questions clearly. As special educators, you are very familiar with the SMART method. I hope that you enjoyed learning another possible way to consider writing questions for evaluation.
Welcome to the second chapter of Module 2. In this chapter, you will create quality evaluation questions using the PARSEC framework. In program evaluation, asking the right questions is crucial. One of the leading thinkers in the business world, Peter Drucker, has stressed the consequences of asking the wrong question. This applies to the education world as well. As you begin to draft evaluation questions, it is important to remember that you will not obtain actionable answers if you don't ask critical questions. The PARSEC framework, drawn from best practices in evaluation, will help you draft quality evaluation questions. PARSEC is an acronym reminding us that our questions should be pertinent, answerable, reasonable, specific, evaluative, and complete. Let's take a closer look at each of these criteria. Pertinent questions are strongly related to the information that program stakeholders and participants want to obtain from an evaluation. If your questions are derived from your logic model, they will most likely be pertinent, particularly if you co-developed the logic model with stakeholders. Answerable refers to whether the data needed to answer questions are available or attainable. Good questions are useless if they cannot be answered. Reasonable relates to what you can expect a program to achieve. Questions should be linked to what the program can practically and realistically achieve or influence. Specific refers to clearly worded questions that avoid broad generalizations, such as variations of, "Is this good?" A specific question directly addresses a single component of the logic model. Evaluative applies to how actionable the answers to questions will be. Actionable means that answers to a particular question can inform changes to a program, policy, or initiative if needed, or that answers can confirm that a program, policy, or initiative is working as anticipated and no action is needed. The answer to a question should inform next steps to make the question worth the effort. Complete refers to the entire set of evaluation questions. Again, the logic model is helpful here. To be complete, the set of questions should address all the logic model components. The resource, Assessing Evaluation Questions, available on the resources page of the website, includes a checklist you can use to revise evaluation questions against the PARSEC framework. In the remainder of this module, you will see the process of revising evaluation questions using the PARSEC criteria. Module 1 introduced a fictitious after-school program called AMP. A middle school has been experiencing low rates of math homework completion among its students. In addition, students have been unsupervised after school. To address these issues, the middle school has started AMP. AMP offers math tutoring, math extension, homework completion support, recreational activities, and field trips during after-school hours. The grant that the school district received requires that the middle school evaluate the implementation of AMP. The school has assembled a team of stakeholders to design and implement the evaluation. The team needs to develop evaluation questions. Here is the AMP logic model, introduced in Module 1. The AMP evaluation team uses the logic model to decide what questions to ask about the program. Evaluation questions should come directly from the logic model. The AMP logic model is available, including citations, on the resources page of the website, so that you can download it for further examination. Take a few minutes to review the logic model so that you can understand how the Parsec criteria apply to the AMP logic model. The AMP evaluation team decides that because AMP is new, the team needs to ask process evaluation questions to learn more about how the program is being implemented and to inform potential changes to the program. However, the team is also interested in the outcomes of the program and decides to ask outcome evaluation questions as well. The team's 2 draft process evaluation questions are: how many students attended AMP, and did tutors enjoy receiving professional development? The team's 2 draft outcome evaluation questions are: did students report having more math homework? And how much did students' test scores increase 3 years after the program was implemented? After reviewing these draft questions, the AMP evaluation team quickly realizes that the questions needed a lot of revision to truly capture what the team wants to know. The team decides to revise the questions by applying the Parsec framework. Doing this will result in higher quality questions that allow the team to gather actionable and meaningful data about the program. In the remainder of Module 2, you will see how the AMP evaluation team applies the Parsec framework and how the questions evolve into the final evaluation questions. You will have a chance to create evaluation questions related to your own program after the examples. Pertinent questions are strongly related to the information that program stakeholders and participants want to obtain from an evaluation. Here are the questions that the AMP evaluation team has drafted. Referring to the AMP logic model, what changes would you make to improve these questions so that they meet the pertinent criterion? For example, you might change question 3 to "Did students complete more math homework?" Because simply asking students to self-report whether they received more homework might not be an accurate measure of homework, and therefore not be as meaningful to stakeholders. Think about the other questions. Then look at how the AMP evaluation team makes their questions more pertinent. After reviewing the draft evaluation questions against the pertinent criterion, the AMP evaluation team revises the questions. This activity requires them to really focus on what they want to learn about AMP. First, the team looks at question 1 and realizes that the total number of attendees really won't tell the team what it wants to know. The team feels that it will be more important to know the attendance for each month of the program. For question 2, the team decides that the tutor's knowledge of effective techniques is more important than the tutor's enjoyment of the professional development. For question 3, the team decides that it cares more about whether students completed more homework than about whether they had more homework. Finally, the team decides that question 4 is already pertinent and does not revise it. The answerable criterion refers to whether the data needed to answer questions are available or attainable. Good questions are useless if they cannot be answered. Before you look at what the AMP evaluation team decides, refer to the logic model and consider what changes you could make to improve the evaluation questions so that they meet the answerable criterion. The AMP evaluation team reviews their revised questions against the answerable criterion. The team decides that data on monthly AMP attendance, tutors' knowledge of effective tutoring techniques, and student homework completion rates are attainable, so the team does not change evaluation questions 1, 2, or 3. However, the team decides that looking at state test scores 3 years after the program is not feasible, given the delays in state test results, the scope of the program, the available funding, and the need to report results quickly. As a result, the team modifies question 4 to focus on end-of-year state test data so that the team can get immediate feedback about the outcomes associated with the program. The reasonable criterion relates to the extent to which questions are linked to what a program can practically and realistically achieve or influence. For example, is it reasonable to expect AMP to influence state test scores in only 1 year? This question might be more reasonable in relation to the goals of the evaluation if its focus was shifted to a more immediate outcome. When the AMP evaluation team considers the reasonable criterion, the team realizes that measuring improved knowledge of effective tutoring techniques as a result of the tutor's professional development would be very hard. It is more reasonable to answer how many tutors received the professional development and how many professional development sessions they attended. In addition, after further discussion, the team realizes that even 1 year's state test results are not reasonable, given the delays in reporting and the many other factors that influence these results. Instead, the team decides that another achievement outcome from the logic model, preparedness for high school math, is more reasonable right now. So the team changes the question. The homework and attendance questions seem reasonable, so the team leaves them as they are. The specific criterion refers to clearly worded questions that avoid broad generalizations, such as variations of, "Is this good?" Are the sample questions specifically aligned to components of the logic model? Is the wording too general? How can the questions be improved? Although the questions are looking a lot better, the AMP evaluation team realizes that the questions are not specific enough according to the specific criterion. For example, the team feels that the professional development question needs to specify the topic of the professional development to ensure that the question measures what they want to see. After all, professional development that is not aligned to the goals of AMP should not count as data about program implementation. Also, determining the amount of homework that students complete is important. Remember that the students were completing only 25% of their homework before the intervention, but the team wants to know how well students did on homework as well. So, the team makes the question more specific by adding an accuracy threshold. The team also realizes that the question is not about the homework completion rate for all students, but about the rate for only AMP participants. The team decides that comparing the homework completion rate for AMP participants with the rate for non-participants would be more specific. Finally, the team looks at the student achievement question and decides that a comparison of student scores on high school math placement tests would be more specific. The evaluative criterion applies to how actionable the answers to the questions will be. Answers should inform next steps in order to make them worth the effort. Can you envision actions that would result from the answers to the 4 AMP evaluation questions? Is it enough to know that students are accurately completing their homework? Or would it be more actionable to know why students are or are not completing homework? The AMP evaluation team examines the questions and asks if the answers will inform changes to AMP. First, the team looks at professional development and realizes that the team needs to know why tutors might not be able to take advantage of professional development opportunities. This information will help the team consider changes to the delivery of professional development. Next, the team decides that it is necessary to not only look at completion and accuracy of homework, but also dig deeper to discern why AMP participants are not completing homework. Doing so might provide information to help the team make programmatic changes to AMP. Finally, the team decides that the question about high school placement tests is the summative outcome the team wants to achieve. That question doesn't need to inform program improvement, so the team leaves it as it is. In addition, the attendance question is evaluative as written. The complete criterion refers to the entire set of evaluation questions. Again, the logic model is helpful here. To be complete, the set of questions should address all the logic model components that are of critical interest. Looking at the AMP logic model, can you think of an additional question that would make the set of evaluation questions more complete? The AMP evaluation team examines the developed questions and the logic model and decides that a few additional questions are needed. For example, the team realizes that the grant requires the team to report the total number of students who participate in the program. The team also decides to gather data about the number of field trips taken and about teacher promotion of AMP. After applying the Parsec framework and using the logic model, the AMP evaluation team comes up with a revised set of evaluation questions to use moving forward. Because AMP is a new program, the team knows that it needs to focus on process questions early in the evaluation to inform program improvements. Chapter 3 will discuss prioritizing the questions. Now that you have looked at an example, it is time for you to draft and revise evaluation questions for your program. At the end of Chapter 1, you drafted initial evaluation questions for your program, identifying the aligned logic model components and categorizing the questions as process or outcome. If you have not done this yet, you can find the Identifying Evaluation Questions worksheet on the resources page of the website. Now use the Parsec framework to examine the questions you drafted at the end of Chapter 1. Keep these criteria in mind as you revise your questions and draft additional questions. A checklist for the Parsec framework, called Assessing Evaluation Questions, is available on the resources page of the website. This checklist may help you as you revise your questions. For now, focus on drafting a complete set of questions. You may notice that your complete set of questions does not address every element of the logic model. This is fine. Although it is critical to develop a logic model that completely describes the program, it is not always necessary to develop a set of evaluation questions that addresses every element. The reality of conducting an evaluation will require that you prioritize the questions. You can point out the elements that you did not address in your evaluation report. This will allow readers to more easily identify the limitations of your evaluation, as well as the areas in which further research is needed. Prioritizing your evaluation questions will be addressed in Chapter 3. Complete this activity before moving on to the next chapter. If possible, allow some time to pass between Chapters 2 and 3 so that you can re-examine your evaluation questions with a fresh perspective. Once you have completed the activity for drafting evaluation questions, you are ready to move on to Module 2, Chapter 3, How to Prioritize Evaluation Questions.
Documenting all the possible evaluation questions and written them using the Parsec method, you enter the convergent phase. This is the phase where you pare down your list. You can't possibly evaluate all questions, so through close interaction with stakeholders, you would determine what questions are best to answer in the evaluation. It is important to consider when later on down the line, you may be involved in program evaluation implementation. For the purposes of this class, this will simply be a decision that you will make through careful discussion and consideration by your group members. The final steps to finalize your evaluation questions are to prioritize questions and then define your criteria. Your resources for this class give you a couple different options for how you can prioritize. You can use the prioritization matrix in your text on page 309 It suggests asking a variety of questions that can help you select which questions are most pertinent to your evaluation. Or you can look at 2 considerations discussed in the final chapter of the IES module on evaluation questions, which walk through another approach for prioritizing your questions.
Welcome to the 3rd chapter of Module 2. In this chapter, you will learn a process for prioritizing and finalizing the evaluation questions that you drafted in Chapter 2. To meet the complete criterion of the Parsec framework in Chapter 2, you may have found yourself drafting 10 or more questions. Some organizations may have the capacity to answer that many questions, but others may have the resources to answer only a few. So an evaluation team must ask, which questions do we focus on? Or, which questions do we focus on first? One strategy for prioritizing evaluation questions is to apply an important, urgent rating system. An important question is necessary to improve or assess a program. For example, in the AMP evaluation, it might be nice to know if tutors enjoyed the professional development, but it is essential to determine whether they mastered the tutoring techniques. This second question would have a higher rating of importance. An urgent question needs an answer as soon as possible, either to satisfy reporting requirements or to obtain necessary information before moving forward. Some urgent questions may be easily or quickly answered using existing data. For example, in the AMP evaluation, the grantor may need to know how many students participated in each activity before the next year's funds are released to the school. This question would have a high rating of urgency. Questions that have high urgency and high importance should have the highest priority, and questions that have low urgency and low importance should have the lowest priority. On this slide, the sweet spot of prioritization is in the upper right quadrant of the graph, highlighting the place where both urgency and importance are at their highest. From your list of evaluation questions, prioritize questions that are both important and urgent as the first set of questions to target. The AMP evaluation team uses the logic model and the Parsec framework to create a list of 10 evaluation questions. Given available time and resources, the grant timeline, and other considerations, the team knows that it cannot address all the questions. So, what are the priorities? What questions have both urgency and importance? When the AMP evaluation team discusses the importance and urgency of each question, 2 things become very clear. First, although the team added question 7 about teacher promotion of the program to make the set of evaluation questions more complete, that question is not very important or urgent to the team. Therefore, the question is not worth the time or resources at this point. Second, although questions 4, 5, and 6 about professional development are moderately important, they aren't urgent. Although the team decides not to pursue these 3 questions at this time, it doesn't mean that they aren't worthy questions. Rather, the priority is placed on other questions, and these 3 questions can be addressed later. Question 3 about recreational activities offered through AMP has high urgency and moderate importance. The evaluation team chooses to prioritize this question because it can be easily and quickly answered using existing data. Questions 1 and 2 about the number of students who participate in AMP are moderately urgent and important, making these questions a priority as well. When the AMP evaluation team discusses the importance and urgency of the outcome questions, the team determines that all of the questions are important, with the 2 homework questions being the most urgent. The team's rating is not surprising, given that the logic model and problem statement highlight these areas as critical needs of the program. After prioritizing the questions, the AMP evaluation team comes up with this list of 6 final evaluation questions. Now it's your turn. Using the Prioritizing Evaluation Questions worksheet available on the Resources page of the website, prioritize your evaluation questions by following the Important, Urgent rating system. You can use a scale of 1 to 5 to rate the importance and urgency of each question. A 1 indicates low importance or urgency, and a 5 indicates high importance or urgency. On the Prioritizing Evaluation Questions worksheet, write an evaluation question in the first column and then place the priority number in the appropriate box. Including all your questions on the worksheet will allow you to examine each question in comparison to the others, making your decisions on priorities a little easier. In the example on this slide, the AMP evaluation team rates the student attendance question a 4 for importance and a 3 for urgency. These ratings will help them decide between this question and other questions that also have high importance and urgency. Once you have a set of final evaluation questions in place, you are ready to move to the next step of the program evaluation cycle, evaluation design. In Module 3, you will learn major considerations for designing an evaluation.
Now that you have whittled down your questions, it is time to set your criteria and standards for your questions. This process will likely be very familiar given your professional experiences. It is important to consider that the criteria you will identify are the factors that define the quality, while the standards are what define the level or acceptable performance. While there are some initiatives, interventions, or curricula that have defined and absolute standards for acceptable performance, some of your programs may consider relative standards. Some examples of relative standards could be to look at outcomes based on past performance or the performance of another program designed to serve similar needs. We hope that this module has given you several different tools and resources to move on to the next phase of planning the program evaluation, writing your evaluation questions and criteria.